Welcome back to another episode of Unmasking Sobriety and Mental Health, where every single week we create survival guides from our collective stories. This week's guest is Kristen Ruth Davis. She is a mental health advocate, speech language pathologist, and writer. She founded the I'm Not Crazy Project because she can't stop talking about how genetic testing found the right psych meds for her brain and saved her life from severe clinical depression. Kristen has told her story on the Dr. Oz Show and the National Alliance on Mental Illness, NAMI, on podcasts and in social media campaigns for biotech companies specializing in pharmacogenetic testing, which is PGX, we'll talk about today, such as Genomind and Illumina. Her writing has appeared in publications such as HuffPost and Writer's Digest. In her former life, she was an investigative reporting fellow with the Washington Post. Most recently, Kristen wrote a hybrid memoir, I'm Not Crazy, that tells her story and explains the science behind psychiatric genetic testing. She loves working as a speech language pathologist with patients healing from strokes, head trauma, or other neurological diseases such as Parkinson's. And as a healthcare worker during the pandemic, she would have lost her shit if she hadn't been on the right psych meds. Her clinical depression has been in remission for 10 years and counting. Kristen lives in Frederick, Maryland, about an hour north of DC, with her fiance and their miniature Dachshund, Zelda. I love that. I am so freaking excited you're here, Kristen. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here and speak with you today.
You have a lot to talk about. You've talked about a lot in your past, and I feel like the conversation with mental health is just like this constantly evolving conversation. And so I'm so excited, today for you to come on and like let's see where things have progressed over the past 10 years since your story and where we are now. So I'm going to kind of turn my mic off, so to speak, and I would love for you to just share with us a little bit about yourself, a little bit, obviously, about your story, and how you even got, involved in this space. And obviously, we have a lot to learn about as well with pharmacogenetic testing, et cetera. So the mic is yours, my friend.
All right. Yes, a lot has changed in the past 10 years, but I really think that pharmacogenetic testing is not talked about enough. And my story really demonstrates why it should be a big part of the conversation today. So, I grew up in St. Petersburg, Florida. I had, a fairly normal, I would say, millennial girlhood. Um, I was the oldest of three kids. My parents are actually both physicians, so, very high medical literacy there, which came in handy when they um, advocated for me during my crisis. Um, but so in high school, um, I was very driven to get into a good college. It was kind of that's what life was all about back then. And, despite having, a supportive family, well aware of my privileged upbringing, I still had suicidal ideations that really began to manifest when I was like 16, 17 years old, which is when a lot of people start having their mental health symptoms. So, my story kind of matches the statistics there. Um, I I got into a good college. I got into Duke University. I wanted to be a journalist. It was always my passion was for writing, and I wanted to, tell stories that were important to society. So I went to college. I studied English, um, and I I had tried to tell my parents that I was depressed before I went to college. I actually realized that my mental experience matched major depressive disorder when I read my AP psychology textbook.
Oh, wow.
So one night I actually uh, sat down with my parents and sort of, you know, gave them the analysis of my, my clinical diagnosis of myself, to my physician parents. And, even though they're, well educated medically, really did not have much of knowledge about mental health at all. And, um, they did give me the option of seeing a therapist after that conversation, but just, how it went, you know, my dad, not to blame him, he's come around a long way since then. But he, in that conversation, sort of made me feel shut down because he didn't really believe me at first. And that's because I masked it so well. I never told anybody really about the reality that was going on in my head, even my close friends, because I just didn't have the language to talk about it. It just didn't really even occur to me to mention the fact that I was having these suicidal ideations. Um, so after that conversation with my parents, um, my attitude was like, okay, I just need to go to college, and like a change of scenery is going to make it better. Like, I just need to get out of my hometown and start living my life and do what I want to do. And, maybe that will solve it. Well, the reality is that I actually did thrive for the first couple years in college, but then by my junior year, I started to spiral and just sort of hit a wall. So I went to the counseling and psychological services office, and I saw a therapist and then a psychiatrist for the first time. And that was really, so I was like, I think 21 years old at the time. That was the first time that I had ever said out loud sort of the details of what was going on in my mind. Like, I uh, described that, I could only envision this dark road that went nowhere in my mind, as if I was having to constantly read the signs that were either pointing towards the right way or the wrong way. And it just, I had such trouble making decisions, which I now know is really one of the primary symptoms of depression. So I just felt a lot of anxiety constantly about making decisions and how they were going to affect me in the future, as if, making the quote wrong decision was going to, destroy my life. And that was really the first time that I had said that out loud and had that sort of challenged by someone, like, when have you been on the right path? Well, I don't know if I've ever been on the right path. And, it was just very telling. So I ended up, this was sort of the first juncture in my life where I really had to give up something because of my depression that I had really wanted. Um, I had gotten landed a newspaper internship with the Charlotte Observer that I was really excited about and wanted to do, but it was, at that point, the hardest decision that I ever had to make, that I just needed to go home and be with my family and try to really, for the first time in my life, confront, actually openly acknowledge the reality of what was going on in my mind, instead of just constantly just, in the name of being productive and achievement, just covering it up. So I, spent the summer at my parents' place, and I saw a psychiatrist in my hometown for the first time. And um, he, I was very, very resistant to taking an antidepressant. The psychiatrist at Duke had given me some Klonopin to take, but I took it very irregularly. It didn't seem to help me at all. So this psychiatrist that I saw in my hometown in St. Pete, um, I think it was maybe my second session with him. He took out this little, purple and yellow box and, was like, "Have you heard of Pristique?" Um, and I was like, no. And and he just told me, this is this new drug on the market. It's helped a lot of people, like you. And, he had built my trust over those couple sessions, and I knew he was, well respected in the community. So um, I took it home, even though I wanted to resist taking it as long as possible. But um, I was actually, it was like near the 4th of July. I was on lived in Florida, so everybody's got boats. I was on a boat ride with like my family and sitting near the bow of the boat, and all I could see were just intrusive thoughts of jumping over the edge in front of the boat. And that was a major turning point for me where I was like, that is just so horrific. I don't want to think these thoughts. If swallowing a pill will alleviate that somehow, like I'm willing to give it a try. So I I took the pill and I continued taking it. And 2 weeks later, I talked to my psychiatrist and, told him the way I described it was I all of a sudden I felt like there was this layer of cotton lining my brain,
Hmm.
like these like dagger thoughts that used to like pierce me and felt physically painful, all of a sudden were sort of like dulled by this like layer of cotton. And not in like a I felt really mentally fuzzy kind of way, more in like it just I felt like there was padding against, like I could still sense those dark thoughts there, but I was sort of insulated from them. And to my surprise, but probably not my doctor's, I continued to get better. And that medication that I was on and that I stayed on for about 5 years, and allowed me to graduate from college and work, writing for local publications and teaching some classes after I graduated. The Pristique is an SNRI, which is a selective serotonin reuptake, norepinephrine reuptake inhibitor, which I now know worked better for my brain than any of the SSRIs that I would be prescribed later. But I was on that for about 5 years. But this psychiatrist that I saw in my hometown, he never really explained to me like why I needed this specific medication. Um, it was sort of just like every session would just be like, okay, how are you sleeping? How are you eating? It was very talk based. There was never really any like, sort of the standard of care in most medical professions is, they take some data from your body, right? Like they'll take at least your vital signs. They might take some imaging, they might do some blood work. He never did any of that. It was all just, everything was just based on what I told him, which, I had no perspective at that time. So we just went with it. But because I didn't really understand, you know, any of the biology behind what was going on in my brain, I thought that, you know, by the time I was almost 26. I, had been on the Prestige for about 5 years, and I thought, hey, I've gotten my life together. I've now moved to DC. I've started graduate school for journalism. I got a investigative reporting fellowship with the Washington Post. So I was like, my life is exactly where I want it to be at 26 years old. Like, I don't need this crutch anymore. So I'm, and, to be perfectly frank, like the sexual side effects were really annoying. I didn't want to deal with that anymore. I just thought, you know, I can move on from this. I'm not someone who needs to be on medication the rest of my life. So I spoke with that psychiatrist from my hometown, and he gave me a schedule to taper off of it. So I tapered off of it. I followed his schedule exactly. I actually didn't have any withdrawal symptoms. Um, and I was okay for the first couple months starting graduate school and my fellowship. Um, but about 3 months into not having it, I started to have daily panic attacks. I started having suicidal ideations again, where um, all I was seeing intrusive thoughts of drowning myself in the Potomac River, because I had to write a story for the Post on a man who had drowned in the Potomac River, and my mind just sort of latched onto that. Um, and I'm on the phone with my mother, who was a nurse before she became a doctor, and she's giving me, you know, all of the advice, all of the, good behavioral things you can do for your mental health. I was going for walks every day. I was spending time in the sun. I to try to sleep at night, because I was only getting 3 or 4 hours of sleep a night for weeks, because my brain just would not shut off. I was, taking melatonin. I was, you know, exercising. I started seeing a psychiatrist again, a local one, and over the phone with my hometown psychiatrist. Um, they put me back on the Prestige, but it didn't seem to do anything. And that was terrifying to me. And because I had someone in my family who actually died by suicide after taking himself off of his medications, and that was playing in my head, as well as um, just some other stories that I've heard, of people who have done that and haven't been able to recover. And so I just had this really ingrained narrative in my head, as my brain chemicals were just completely awry, that I wasn't going to get out of this, that I was never going to get better again. um and what precipitated after that, i I had an episode of self-harm, in my house there in DC, and thankfully I was living with my uh, best friend at the time, and she found me in the bathroom, and she called 911. And I spent, um, that was my first of what would become a few involuntary 72-hour holds in the psych unit in DC. um, I it was humiliating, but the most loving thing that my best friend could have done for me at the time. I was really on a bad path and felt completely out of control. So my mom flew up to DC, um, and I was stabilized. I was in a safe place, but you know my mother, the physician who knew a lot about how psych meds work, was trying to have a conversation with the attending psychiatrist, and he tried to get out of talking to her directly, said that she could just talk to him through the residents. So she had to just keep, you know, advocating and advocating to try to speak to the attending directly and try to get some answers as to why they were prescribing me what they were prescribing me. And she really wasn't getting, I mean, absolutely no compassion. And no answers. So, what did she do? Well, she took me home, and my family was basically on 24/7 suicide watch while I was home. Um, and, but, uh, I, I had another episode of self-harm, in which they was sent to another 72-hour hold in the local hospital. And so really what happened after that was I had over like 7 different inpatient stays in 5 different states of various levels of care. I was in hospital psych units. I was in some longer term care where I was at some places for a couple months. I I was prescribed over 15 different combinations of medications, none of which were working. I would kind of improve a little bit if I was at a place for a couple months, because I'd like get to know people, and I made some really good connections with other patients and, some of the providers. Other providers were, um, you know, some were, at best, uh, tolerated my illness, and others just outright shamed me for it. Um, I had a neuropsychologist who literally, the first question he asked me in my session with him, he goes, without warming up the conversation at all, no rapport building, he goes, are you still considering suicide? And, I thought, okay, I have to be honest for him to take care of me. So I said yes. And he literally stuck up his middle fingers in my face, like jabbed them in front of my face and goes, suicide is this to your family. Yeah. And so all the progress that I had made at that point in my treatment just totally backpedaled. I just completely retreated into myself, and then was very distrustful of health professionals going forward, as you can imagine. Um, and, there were other instances too where I just, was treated more like a problem than a person with a real medical issue. Um, and, labeled as treatment resistant, which is a label that I no longer agree with. I now know that I wasn't treatment resistant. I was just encountering providers who weren't using the latest technology to help me in the best way possible. And I mean, I had to go through 2 rounds of electroconvulsive therapy because I was labeled treatment resistant and I wasn't prescribed the right combinations of medication. Yeah. Well, it turns out there is a combination of medication that works for me. And how that was found was I ended up in the care just miraculously by this amazingly compassionate, progressive psychiatrist. I met him at actually, it was like an alternative treatment center where um, it was like a residential community where it was actually a working organic farm.
Okay.
So very much non-institutional. And he had just started working there, had just started using genetic testing in his practice. Um, and so he he was so kind to me from the beginning. He from our very first session, he wanted to know about me as a person. He was the first medical professional to really praise me for things that my brain could do well, and passions that I had, things that I wanted to get back to instead of just, treating me like a psych problem. And he was just uh, so encouraging. He was like, okay, well, you know, uh, I, depression tells you these things, but they're not true. Like, we're going to make a plan. We're going to get some data. We're going to make a plan. So, I was like, okay, here we go.
Fingers, yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, I still didn't believe that anything was going to help me, but I was like, we've done everything else. Like, let's just keep going with this. So, he practiced differently than any of the other psychiatrists that I had encountered. He actually did blood work to analyze my body holistically, what was going on with me, to see perhaps if I had a thyroid issue, because that can play into mental health sometimes. Any infections. There's a lot more in other body systems that can affect mental health than just, the answers that your brain can provide through talking to someone. He did a test where he was actually able to kind of roughly measure the level of cortisol in my body, um, and found that, surprise, surprise, my cortisol levels were just off the charts because I was still having daily panic attacks. And most importantly, he had his nurses, they swabbed the inside of my cheeks. They took some samples of my cells. They sent them off to a lab from a wonderful company called Genemind that they analyzed my DNA and then issued a report to my psychiatrist. And he was within 2 weeks, he sat down with me and my parents to deliver the results, and they were incredibly revealing and vindicating. Um, I, it was like in that moment, I just thought, oh my God, I'm not crazy. So, what I've suspected, what I've known about myself, since I was a teenager, that there was something inside of me that was preventing me from being as happy and stable as other people, that was finally validated scientifically.
Mhm.
And there were several genes that intersect. And my psychiatrist actually said, your genes presented the crossroads for disaster.
Oh,
It
wow.
was inevitable that at some point in your life, you were going to have a major mental health crisis.
Oh, wow.
And hearing that, it was like, it's not my fault. That was the new loop that started playing in my brain. And because here was the proof of that, I have a variant of the MTHFR gene where because because I don't have enough of one particular enzyme, that means that my brain can only produce about 60% of the serotonin that a healthy brain should have.
Mhm.
So there was that. I had it explained why SSRIs were never going to work for me. They just overload my brain with serotonin. So I just ended up more dizzy and disoriented. Um, and so those were, and like the report also went into how my body can metabolize certain medications. So with all of this data, this amazing psychiatrist, uh, he made the best guess on, okay, there's this new antidepressant, Vibrid, that's out, which is, it's like an SSRI, but it has sort of an additional mechanism. It's kind of like a super SSRI.
Okay.
Um, so that plus, with his holistic thinking, he's also a big believer in supplementing with natural supplements as well. So I I started taking supplements that would actually work with the chemistry in my brain. And like I take a special form of B12, so I have more mental energy. Um, fish oil tablets, all of these things combined, so I take a handful of pills every morning, but because and I've taken almost the same cocktail with a few additions or subtractions here or there for, almost over 10 years now, since that happened. And my depression has been in remission. I was able to, once that I was stabilized and my brain actually had the chemicals that I need, I was able to rebuild my life. It was a slow process, but I decided to go to school for speech language pathology. I wanted to, I've always been passionate about communication and language. So I wanted to learn more about the brain, kind of learn more how to heal my own and hopefully help some other people. So um, I graduated with my master's from George Washington University in 2018. And it was around that time that um, I got into contact with Genimind, the company that helped save my life. And through that connection, I was able to, kind of launch into a lot more public advocacy and started telling my story. And um, then I was on the Dr. Oz show, and I just, I really received this outpouring of people who wanted to tell me their stories, had questions, were, offering, such sweet, encouraging words of support for me, that I, um, in partnership with this amazing organization, Creative Visions, we founded the I'm Not Crazy Project, so that I can try to provide people with the information that I didn't have, that my family didn't have while I was going through, the worst year of my life. And, I spent half my lifetime looking for answers that, I hope that I can provide for other people now.
Unbelievable. How did you, I mean, you spent quite literally half your life like in this traumatic existence, essentially. It seems to me in your story that there was still a layer of hope. Like you never gave up, right? Like in all of that, there was still this like tenacious version of Kristen that was searching for the right information, for the right answer. Where do you think that came from? And how did you, do you know like how you kept that alive?
Um, I credit a lot of that to, um, I mean, I owed it to my family. I they fought so hard for me, when I couldn't fight for myself, that I just felt like I needed to keep going. A lot of it also had to do with um, I was really, really close to my maternal grandfather growing up. And I, before he passed, I promised him that I would try to write some of his stories someday, because he had this just really, really interesting life. And I just admired who he was so much. And so I'd always been driven to, you know, I knew that I wanted to tell stories, and I sort of had this awareness of like, okay, I need to get through this so I can honor my promise to him somehow. And I also sort of had this meta awareness of like, okay, this is awful. I don't know if I'm going to survive this, but if I do, I'm going to be able to tell this story, and hopefully this will mean something.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, so I think that's a lot of where it came from.
Wow. Yeah, no, it's I don't know, your story has such a dialectic because on the one hand it's so sad and it's so tragic and you have been to that place so many times. But on the other hand, I just see this path of hope and like of searching for that right answer. And of course we know now finding that right answer that's um giving you the life that you can live, that's worth living. Um, I'm curious a little bit about the period in your life when you said to yourself, I don't need the meds anymore. And I think this is so, so common, especially with people who may be diagnosed as a minor. So they're, getting medicated. Well, you didn't start your meds as a minor, but as a younger person, when you're kind of like under the care of your parents, perhaps, and then you kind of get into young adulthood and do make that decision to go off the meds. And then, of course, it opened up this whole can of worms essentially for you. Like, what would you say to somebody who might be in that position right now? And the reason I ask is because it's like, I'm curious, and I'm sure you've asked yourself this question, like, what would have happened if you never went off the meds? Like, would you have even gotten the answers? Would you have come to that place anyway, one way or another? Like, have you had that conversation with yourself?
Yes. Yeah. I've definitely thought about those alternate realities.
The
I
sliding
mean,
doors of Kristen.
yeah, I mean, I I think I would have. I don't think there's a world in which I never would have gotten off of it.
Mhm.
If it wasn't then, it would have happened at some point. Yeah, it was just a matter of time, because the major thing is that, so many people, go off of their medications because they don't understand the biology of why they need it. And, not everybody is like me. Not everybody has what's called, what I have is an endogenous biochemical depression. So, meaning that biochemically in my brain, the baseline in my brain is actually depression.
Hmm. That's your
Without,
existence, like how you
yeah,
show up in the world. Yeah.
I mean, that's without medical intervention, that's the reality of my brain, because my brain just can't chemically produce. I don't have the specific MTHFR enzyme in my brain that can allow, it's just one link in the chain that creates serotonin, and that's a little bit broken in my brain. I mean, it's similar to someone who has diabetes, type 1 diabetes. Well, their body can't physically
Yeah.
produce insulin, so they have to have supplemental insulin to live. And it's a daily, management of their health that they have to do. So it's the same, it's very, very similar to that for
Yeah.
me. But I've had, I've referred so many people, uh, friends, family, like community members, strangers to get genetic testing done. So I've heard a lot of other people's stories too about what they learn. And, for instance, I have a friend who she learned that she has different genetics where she's just a little bit more prone to, if she goes through a stressful period, it can trigger depression for her, but her baseline isn't like the low serotonin like I have. So she can get away with just, going on kind of an antidepressant.
Episodal kind of, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Like
Yeah.
situational, she'll treat it for a little while and then she can taper off of it and she'll be fine. So there's
Yeah.
plenty of people like that too. I just am not one of those people.
Mhm.
So because I understand, you know, the scientific reasons of why I need these specific medications, I'm never going to go off of them again.
Yeah.
I will take them for the rest of my life so that I can have a life.
Continue living this way. If I'm listening right now, I'm like hooked. I want to know about genetic testing. Can I know this is going to be on your website so people can go obviously look in depth at the Genomind website and through I'm Not Crazy, but what's kind of like the I don't know, the 101, the facts 101 that we need to know about pharmacogenetic testing, access, give us kind of the 411.
Absolutely. Um, so anyone who's Medicare eligible, Medicare does cover it. I know that's usually the first question that I get from people is how much does this cost? It sounds so new. It's really not that new. Just a lot of people don't know about it, and more physicians need to use it. But Medicare does cover it. United Healthcare usually does too. Other commercial insurances are kind of hit or miss. It depends, but it usually, no matter where you get it, it usually wouldn't cost more than $300 out of pocket.
Mhm.
Um, so there are different ways that you can get it. I highly recommend, anyone who's interested in getting it, just Google, psychiatrist who uses genetic testing or who uses pharmacogenetic testing near me. And the Google AI summary is really good at, providing you with people who psychiatrists who already use that in their practice. And I highly recommend going to a psychiatrist who's already versed in using it, because if you go to a psychiatrist who hasn't been using it for a while and they're just sort of figuring it out, you're not going to get as in-depth information as you would of someone who's been using it for a little while and has really taken the time to educate themselves on the science of it.
Got it. Because there, once you get the reporting, it's your psychiatrist that you're working with towards a solution.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So you can't just, it has to be ordered
Okay.
through a physician. Um, and psychiatrists can provide that counseling. In some cases, you can actually just work directly with a pharmacist or a psychopharmacologist.
Hmm.
Um, Genomind, as I mentioned, the company that helped save my life, they will work with providers to, any provider who's interested in beginning to use it. They will work with the provider to, give them that education they need to help interpret that report. And included in the report is actually, uh, a phone or like video chat consult with some of their experts that work for the company who are well versed in it.
And what if I'm somebody that says, for example, Kristen, I feel like, I'm diagnosed, my meds, I think they're doing good. Like, I feel like I'm good. Like, how would I still benefit from this testing?
Well, um, I I mean, if you're good with what you're on, there's no reason to change what you're on. But I've had people, so I also refer patients, from my clinical practice
Mhm.
as a speech language pathologist. Um, and I'm lucky enough to work for a health system who we do offer the genetic testing. So in some cases, it's not just psych med related. You can look at other body systems too, like pain medications. Sometimes people um, will have really bad psychiatric reactions to pain meds.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So even if you're good on your current psych meds, it's good to have that confirmation and also just figure out, okay, so I'm good on these psych meds. Why am I good on
Why?
these
It's
psych
the
meds?
why, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
the why. Like, why is this working for my brain? And that is what increases compliance with
Hmm.
people. When you understand the why, then you're much more likely to stick with it,
Yeah.
even when you're just winning at life and you
Yeah.
feel like you don't need it anymore.
Yeah. It's funny because I obviously talk a lot about bipolar, and I literally just posted something on social media like today that says one of the first signs I know that I'm going into a manic episode is that I feel like I don't need to take my medicine, right?
Yes,
And like you
yes.
have that like
I believe
invincibility,
I
like
liked that video. Yeah.
and that's it, right? So for somebody like me, like I've only been stable for 2 years with the cocktail that I'm on, which is the longest I've been stable. So celebration there. But yeah, like I'm definitely that brain that if you tell me the why of anything, any job I've ever had, anything I ever do, I always say to the leader, like, just tell me the why. And I feel like that's the same with my own body. And I think that also allows us to advocate for ourselves. Like so much of this process
Absolutely.
is because this testing, it only takes you so far, right? Like we still have to take it to the finish line.
Hmm.
And so it gives you what you need to be able to advocate for yourself with the right people. Um, and I love that you can like Google and it's going to show you who's in your area because if anybody's story is going to demonstrate it better, the number of providers that you encountered that weren't equipped enough, were just straight up rude and disrespectful and put you down, or just the ones that like didn't have all the information, right? Like you've encountered every kind of provider out there. So I feel like it's so hard because we want so badly to just like put ourselves in someone's care and just trust them just because they have that title or just because they have that degree. And unfortunately, like we do have to do the extra homework a lot of the time to find like the right provider, um, which
Absolutely.
yeah, it
Yes.
really is.
Advocacy, self advocacy is huge. And having people that love you advocate for
Mhm.
you too. I
Mhm.
mean, even having parents who, couldn't be more, literate in how the medical system works, they still felt like they were just completely just fumbling around in the
Yeah,
dark
isn't
trying
that
to help
amazing?
me. And
Yeah.
so many people feel that way. And especially, I mean, when you're trying to advocate for yourself, when you have mental illness, you have cognitive impairment. When
Uphill battle. Mhm.
yes, you have memory issues.
Mhm.
The brain studies show that the hippocampus, which is the memory center of the brain, actually shrinks when you're severely depressed.
Yeah.
Um, so how are people supposed to manage this
Yeah.
themselves?
Yeah. And
They
it
can't.
doesn't magically like come back either, like just because you're on medication. Like that can stay shrunk or it can take years, decades to like repair itself from that, which is crazy. You have encountered so many different providers. You've also encountered so many different medications. Talk to us about I feel like the conversation on SSRIs is very front and center right now. Talk to us about that.
Yes. So I think my story demonstrates how, you can taper off of a medication that and not really have withdrawal. I never went through withdrawal. I mean, my psychiatrist, I believe, he was doing, you know, what he thought was best, but um, with I think, pharmacogenetic testing needs to be a key part of this conversation because, doing all of these behavioral things, that I tried to do, like, exercising, getting enough sunlight, but like because of the chemicals in my brain, I could not sleep. It's not just as simple as like, okay, try to get 8 hours of sleep and you don't need a medication. No, I serotonin actually gets converted into melatonin. So because I didn't have enough serotonin, I didn't have enough melatonin to stay
Yes.
asleep.
Yes.
So like I'm one of those people where like just I tried all the lifestyle things, and those were never ever going to give me the chemicals that my brain just physically cannot produce on
Yeah.
its own. So I understand it's not that I disagree that, antidepressants might be overprescribed. Like in some cases they probably are.
Hmm.
I mean, I know that, people whose mental illness is rooted in trauma, they're less likely to respond well to antidepressants and they're going to respond better to therapy because, that's what their brain needs to
Yeah.
heal. It's not, like necessarily an endogenous biochemical
Yeah.
issue like mine is.
Hmm.
But, the thing that pharmacogenetic testing allows is us to, you know, precisely differentiate, like with what brain is what,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
like,
What are we treating? And in some
yeah,
cases, it's a little bit of both, but like at least we know we have that information.
exactly.
And like
Yeah,
obviously, I'm assuming you still prioritize sleep and sunlight and exercise and good eating and all those things. But to your point, that it, in and of itself wasn't ever going to solve anything, right? It's going to support it now. But um, hmm,
yeah. I mean, SSRIs are that's usually where psychiatrists start.
yeah.
But that's based on statistics.
Yeah.
That's based on the quote average patient.
Yes.
But the reality is that no one is really average. Only about 30% of people have their symptoms go into remission with the first medication that they
Yeah.
try. And
Yeah.
so yeah, it's not that people don't need medication, they might need a different
The
medication.
right. Well, and that's,
Yeah.
I mean, again, like, obviously, like a lot of the audience is bipolar specific. So I think it's worth mentioning too, like, yeah, a lot of people, their first medication that they're getting prescribed is an SSRI, and somebody with bipolar, that's flipping them into mania a lot of the time. And without that, like just imagine a world where we did this genetic testing first, right? And then we're getting the information we need, and oh, no, we're not going to prescribe an SSRI to this brain because it's going to completely flip it on its side. And it takes, on average, for a bipolar person, 10 years to get a proper diagnosis. We go through hell and high water and back before we finally get the right diagnosis. And so I think when you and I first connected, like selfishly, this was like, I was like, oh my gosh, like imagine what this could do for the bipolar community, you know? I mean, every community, but like, obviously just given the work that I do, like, oh my gosh, like how much pain and suffering we could be preventing just by early intervention, you know?
Absolutely.
So,
Yes. I mean, that's what I think there's more of a push for this, but yes, like our healthcare system needs to shift towards, holistic preventative care.
mhm.
And this could be just such an important foundation of that
Yeah.
could really, yeah, prevent so much suffering, promote so much understanding. Yeah, so obviously I can't talk
Can't
about
talk
it
about it. I
enough.
know. And so obviously you founded I'm Not Crazy Project. You have written your memoir, I'm Not Crazy. So tell us what you're working on now, because you've been doing this stuff for a long time. So what's on Kristen's plate right now?
Well, I'm gearing up for book publishing. I've completed my memoir, and that's been a healing journey in and of itself. I've it's been a lot of, yeah, solitary healing. Kind of. I'm really excited to, be actually in real time speaking with more people now, such as yourself. So that's really what I'm moving towards these days, is just more public outreach. We're launching a newsletter that the Not Crazy Times.
Oh my God, I love that.
um, Trying to keep everybody not
Exactly.
crazy
On brand.
in
You're on
these
brand.
crazy times.
Yep.
um, you can sign up for that through my website, I'm not crazy project.org.
Perfect. Okay.
And yeah, in the newsletter will just feature, you'll be the first to hear about updates, or behind the scenes book stuff, how the publishing's going. I'm always reading mental health memoirs, so little blurbs about book recommendations, and just brain health and advocacy strategies that I hope will be really helpful for people.
Amazing. I am not crazyproject.org, and that's the best way to get in touch with Kristen. Kristen, your story is incredible. I mean, just what you've been through and how you advocated for yourself and where you are now, I think just really opens up an incredible door of hope for so many people that are struggling, have struggled, have family members who are struggling. So thank you so much. Keep doing the work you're doing. Like, I'm so happy that I came across you, because I just think what you're doing is incredible. Um, one last question for you before we sign off. I'm really curious, after all your experience and the work you're doing now, what does crazy mean to you?
Well, crazy is a very loaded word, right? Um, I It's still a part of my vocabulary, of course. It can communicate passion, I'm crazy about you, kind of bewilderment. That's so crazy. But, in my experience, it can also be used to, shame people into silence, invalidate some people's perspectives. That was in large part, a narrative that played into my head and kept me silent for so long, is, I don't want to say anything that's going to make me look crazy. And so now with the I'm Not Crazy project, I have the proof on paper that, I had an illness. I'm not crazy. Um, yeah. But I feel like, it's one of those words that, the more you use it and sort of, it can sort of take away the sting the more you use it and just sort of repackage it for your own purposes.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you so much for being here. I'm so excited for you to go on your publishing journey, and I am the first to sign up as an advanced reader copy for your memoir. I would love to read it. Kristen, thank you so much for being here today. Unmasking Sobriety and Mental Health listeners, tune in a couple of weeks for another story.